Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Rutledge, Director of Corporate Communications for Minnesota Power, and welcome to our very first edition of our new podcast, Minnesota Power Lights On. We're going to use this venue to talk about some of the exciting projects that Minnesota Power has going on, shed some light on the exciting energy industry where there's really an incredible transformation underway, and also hopefully answer some burning questions that our customers here in northeastern Minnesota may have. And we'll also be highlighting some of the very talented members of our team who are working behind the scenes day in and day out to keep your power reliable 24/7. And speaking of those talented folks, I'm really honored to welcome my very first guest to our very first podcast, Dan Gunderson, Minnesota Power's Vice President of Transmission System Planning and Operations. That's really a mouthful, Dan. Welcome.
Thank you. It is a long title. Before we get started here, though, for our very first podcast, I wanted to bring you a gift that is very special to me. This is a meter that was installed on the Minnesota Power system for probably over 80 years. It's over 100 years old.
Wow.
But very representative of where I started my career here at Minnesota Power in metering. But I thought this would be a great addition to the podcast studio.
Well, thank you for that, Dan. I think you are starting an incredible tradition. I love gifts, and certainly this has a lot of history behind it. So you talked about your career here with Minnesota Power, and you and I actually started around the same time. I know that we went through orientation together. I'm sure 18 or 19 years ago, we weren't sitting there and going, hey, I bet we'll do a podcast together one day. But let's talk about your role here at Minnesota Power. How'd you get your start, and how has your position evolved?
Sure. Well, I don't think podcasts were a thing 20 years ago. Maybe that was the first intro, but
okay, you're dating me, Dan.
But so I've been with the company here about 20 years.
Okay.
I started within the meter department, really working in both meter operations and with the automation projects happening in that part of the business. That was really the first 6 years of my career, both Minnesota Power and not here, was working in the metering area. So I have a lot of passion for this. Stuff like this means a lot to me, but also represents, kind of an interesting transition from where we were in the past to where we are now. Mm-hmm. And good reminder that, we are standing on the shoulders of some pretty great people who came before us and built this great company that we're at today. From the meter department, I kind of had a winding path to get a very diverse amount of operations experience. So I've worked everywhere from our substation, construction and maintenance area, then system protection. I had an opportunity to manage that area, as well as working in distribution, where, as you well know, we've had a lot of storm experience there in terms of working in distribution and trying to figure that out, and eventually landed in our transmission area here, and had the opportunity to lead a lot of different groups along the way. So I've been very grateful for those career experiences.
Well, and we're grateful that you're here. Certainly a long history with our company, and now you're in the transmission division. And I want to talk about transmission because certainly every time I turn around, I feel like we're talking about a new transmission project. And you and I could talk about energy and the industry, for hours. But I think there's a lot of folks out there. Maybe we could start kind of small to begin with for the uninitiated, because I think a lot of people, certainly there's a lot of smart people out there who understand how electricity works, energy, et cetera. But there's also a lot of folks who really don't pay attention to electricity until the power is out. So let's talk about the grid. We hear a lot about the importance of modernizing the grid. What is the grid, Dan, and how does it work?
So the grid is a fascinating instrument, I'll say. I think it was the National Geographic did a survey, and the power grid was one of the greatest innovation of the last century. The grid is something that creates and delivers energy all at the same time. So the things that are being generated are serving almost instantaneously. Anytime you flip a light switch on, the generators have to respond to that. And the grid is everything in between that does that. And that's a really kind of hopefully easy way to explain it. But there is no, and there is some storage on the system when you look at battery storage, and you see that with portable devices and things like that. But the challenge always with the electrical grid is it's always on. And you always have to respond to everything real time because it's generating and delivering in a real time manner. So it's very, very difficult when there's problems that arise on that system, as you all know.
Right. And we work very hard to manage that grid, obviously, and working with MISO. I'll ask you about MISO in a minute. But so you and I have talked about transmission before. And I think one of the ways you described it to me, which was really effective, was really talking about how it's like a series of highways.
Yep.
So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the best ways I've heard the grid described in terms of different portions of it is transmission is like the interstate highway system. It is a dedicated delivery, like you can go long distances with stopping off points like exits. And then when you get to lower voltage transmission, that's more like the U.S. highway system where you have more off ramps and more capability, and it's a little bit lower cost to have turnouts. And then our distribution system is more like getting down to city streets, right up into your driveway, which is like your service drop. So if you think about your journey home, our grid operates a lot like that, to where you're on a very high capacity system and then moving down to lower and lower capacity systems until you arrive at your destination. That's exactly where a power grid works for a average residential customer.
Well, Minnesota Power is certainly in the middle or just starting some really important transmission projects. And certainly we're seeing that with our utility peers as well. Dan, why now in terms of why are we seeing all this investment into transmission, into the grid?
Well, I think probably there's two key reasons. One, especially when you look at existing system investments, we have aging infrastructure. Most of the grid that we see today was built, in the 1970s or earlier. Some of it was more into the early 80s, but overall we have an aging grid. But the second piece is the sources of generation are changing. We are moving from a lot of centralized, mostly fossil-based generation to a much more diverse set of generation that provides carbon-free energy. And the result of that is you are going to have new locations from which energy is generated that you need to move it to where it's used. And so when you look at that in terms of a large-scale grid, all of that movement creates changes in the way energy moves, and you need to invest more in transmission to connect to a lot of the existing distribution system that's there.
And to really carry that power from where it's being generated. So such as a wind farm, for example, right? Or a solar array.
Yep, absolutely. And those solar arrays and wind farms are in different places than our centralized coal and gas facilities were as a grid. So as you have these most aging assets, that's the things that are changing. And you're also seeing people being able to redevelop in those locations where those facilities were. But we also have, you got to remember too, we still have growth as a country. So, we have to plan for that when we look at our system and the system capacity as well. So when we look at upgrading and investing today, we're always thinking about 15 to 20 years in the future of what we're going to need. So that's part of the planning criteria that we have as well, that we need to think about as we're upgrading today. It's just not replacing the same thing.
Yeah, and I love that you point that out. We talk a lot about the importance of planning, and I think when people hear us say, we have to take a 15-year outlook, there's nothing last minute happening, right? When it comes to transmission investment, transmission upgrades, and planning, because it really does take a long time. Maybe explain why it does take so long.
Yeah, so your average transmission project from concept to completion takes about 15 years. When you look at a larger scale transmission project, it's not a short time frame for that to be completed. And a lot of that is the permitting processes, as well as you need to work through generally a larger series of landowners, depending on the type of project, to purchase land and right of way to build the transmission, and finally getting to construction, which can take several years as well. So when you look at the span of time it takes to build, it's an incredible feat, and we're trying to bring that down to less and less time to develop, but it's still a very long process. And so, as you can imagine, by the time in a 15-year project, from when you started to when you're finished, a lot happens in 15 years, and the world can be a changed place from what you had originally anticipated. So you try to think of all those factors before you start.
And you don't have like a crystal ball somewhere in your locker, but it really does require us to be able to look out in the future. Absolutely.
And that's one of the interesting elements with transmission is they're very long live systems. Once that 15-year construction period is completed, that asset's going to last another 50 to 60 years, and require initially a minimal amount of maintenance, mostly things like tree trimming and inspection, and then a little bit more maintenance at the tail end of its life. But overall, they're very efficient assets over their lifespan.
I think you touched on this, but let's talk about transmission and investment and all the things that we're doing in terms of how that is such an important component of Minnesota Power's energy forward strategy and achieving really clean energy goals.
Yeah, I mean, the transmission development is really intertwined with energy forward in that, from the place we started from, our energy mix is changing as a utility, which is driving a lot of the changes in how energy is flowing on our grid. And we have both small examples of that and large examples of that. The smaller examples of that we had, when we closed 7 of 9 coal facilities, was our North Shore Loop project, which when you look at transmission longevity, our Duluth Loop project is the last part of the North Shore Loop project to provide an additional path in Duluth here, to de-risk some of the reliability concerns that we have with the North Shore Loop and the city of Duluth. So that's a perfect example of long-lived. We didn't get to that for a while, but all of it driven by reduction in generation resources. Now, when we look at the rest of our generation resources, a lot of the things that we see changing is more renewables on the system, and we're not the only ones that are using those parts of our system. We're using a lot of it, but the grid is going to be dynamic on a daily basis, and so a lot of the studies we do is to prevent problems and issues on the system and ensure we have the right size and type of transmission lines to ensure that those don't happen in any of our operating scenarios that might cause an issue for our system.
Right. It's all about reliability, resiliency of the grid. Let's talk about just how interconnected we are. Right. I want to help people get kind of that big picture. So let's talk about MISO, because you will hear Minnesota Power from time to time talking about MISO. There may be a strain on the system, especially on the hottest days of the summer or the coldest days of the winter. And MISO's job is really to operate this regional grid. How do they help keep all of us connected and keep the power on for all of us?
Yeah, MISO is basically like they're the regional transmission organization that kind of sets the market and daily operations of the grid. So when we look at how we need to run, MISO has a lot to do with that, including outages and the kind of how the grid is utilized, and also they try to optimize to avoid things like congestion and take into consideration, maybe outages of generation facilities that are planned or unplanned. So all of that kind of comes through, but it's over a really, really large area. So when you think of MISO, it's from North Dakota to Michigan, all the way south to Louisiana. And they're trying to manage all of that on a kind of daily basis and day ahead basis for the energy grid as a whole. And so that creates some of its own unique challenges in that they may have recurring problems that need to be solved. And so they also do long-term planning in addition to short-term planning. So we get involved as a company in all those different aspects of MISO at different times.
Okay, that makes sense. And again, just stressing the importance of how we all need to work together.
Yeah. One of the unique things, and this is what I actually love about the utility business, is we don't have too many competitive relationships with our neighbors and partners. In fact, we do a lot of joint planning together, particularly on the transmission side of our business, where we have interconnections, we may have jointly owned facilities. It is very much a neighborly approach to problem solving. And it's kind of unique in our industry to see those types of relationships and really getting after the best solutions and seeing what everybody can provide and bring to the table it's a really cool feature of being able to work together kind of in a non-competitive way.
And it helps that Dan is so nice. One of the nicest guys. Okay, so let's talk about one of our neighbors, North Dakota. Minnesota Power has a lot of wind resources out there, wind farms. And recently we were in the news for our HVDC project that is being built, is underway in Solway Township. So I want to talk a little bit about that because I personally think it is such a cool project. But let's really talk about why the need now with HVDC. Maybe explain what it is, right? What we're building, DC converter, and how it really benefits our customers.
Yeah. So going back to our earlier analogy, the highway analogy, if the transmission system is the interstate system, HVDC is like an expressway with no exits. So it's like a 465-mile expressway that you can't get off of. But it makes it very efficient for point to point. And that system was envisioned back in the 1970s, in the early 1970s, as a opportunity to bring coal generation to Minnesota from central North Dakota. In about 2009 is when we had transitioned that from coal by wire, essentially using that transmission for coal, transitioning out of that to wind by wire with our Bison facilities. So the thing that makes HVDC really unique is that over really long distances, it has much lower losses than AC. So it's more economically efficient. And it also kind of you can tie regions together without having a kind of real-time connection. So you can have kind of independent connections on both ends, which makes it a really unique asset from that perspective as well. But, overall, the HVDC is exactly what it sounds like, where it's a conversion of AC to DC. And the same thing that happens with your iPhone plug. Your iPhone charges on DC, so you plug into the wall, and that's a little AC to DC converter. We're doing the same thing on a really large scale with a lot of other, I think challenging factors that come in that's different from your phone, but it is the same type of concept.
So we're bringing the wind energy from North Dakota. It's traveling 465 miles. We convert it here in Duluth. Mm-hmm. And when we say convert, we're converting it because we're taking it from this long distance, and then we need to step it down, or we need to convert it.
We need to convert it. So all customers take power at their homes with alternating current. So there isn't a direct delivery method for high voltage direct current. And so because of that, we basically we convert that energy to be used on the grid here, and everything that was generated in North Dakota was generated and delivered via AC, and we're doing the same thing on this end. But overall, that's more efficient than just having another AC transmission line to do the transmission.
And of course, really important for us to make this investment because this equipment is like 50 years old.
Yeah.
It's time to replace it.
It is. It's going to be over 50 years old by the time the facility comes out of service. And the lifespan of those facilities when it was put in was about 30 to 35 years. So huge credit to our teams that have kept those facilities running. They have good maintenance plans, and we've had our share of maintenance that we've had to do with those facilities. But overall, we've kept them running well past their useful life. But now it's time to do the replacement, and we're trying to do that in the most economically effective way possible by leaving the existing facilities in as long as possible before we cut over to the new ones. So.
And Dan, maybe you could clear up some confusion on this. We have gotten a lot of questions about this project specifically and whether it's being built to specifically serve the proposed data center in Hermantown.
Yeah, this project, the project that we're delivering today, the concept was in 2014. And we have worked through probably a decade of iterations with the project, technology changes. So it has nothing to do with any data center. It is a age-based replacement and part of our energy forward strategy in trying to have more carbon-free energy delivered from North Dakota, as well as having additional insights into the future for even more carbon-free resources as well. So making that capacity as large as possible as we can, since we're only going to do this once probably in the next, hopefully 50 years.
And then you'll be, right. You can maybe add some of the stuff that might be coming out of the old DC converter to our collection.
Next podcast, we'll bring some HVDC memorabilia. Yeah.
Well, before we go, Dan, and I can't thank you enough for really coming and talking all things transmission with us. A couple of years ago, I remember you being interviewed by the Duluth News Tribune. It was during one of the most stunning Northern Lights display that I think the Northland had seen in many, many years. And I think you had taken your family out somewhere. And I was just curious, is it your love of energy that also ties into the Northern Lights display?
Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast we could get into. It's really unique, but when we have, that's something that we actually get alerts from because when the Northern Lights are really strong, it can affect the power grid. And so those are the times when you see really strong Northern Lights. We are watching our system very closely at those times, but that's probably for another time. And we have some other guests that might be able to talk to that a little bit better.
Right. Well, I know you were keeping an eye on the grid that night, but also probably keeping an eye on the sky.
Enjoying the lights. Absolutely.
All right. Dan Gunderson, Minnesota Power's Vice President of Transmission System Planning and Operations. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for joining us for Minnesota Power's Lights On podcast. Have a great day.
Thank you.